Okay, for the people that are not showing up, there will be a recording later. If you can't hear me, please let me know. Alright. So, do any of you, know what drawing warm-ups are? Alright. So, the reason why, I would like to start with that is because a lot of people actually, don't really, they don't really understand how important it is. And the reason why I think it's so important is because it actually helps you, draw better lines. For example, if you pressed too hard, for some reason it's on the wrong thing. If you press too hard, your lines will look like that. And if you, press, too light, nothing's gonna show up, right? So, I believe that it basically helps, make your drawings look less stiff. Which I know Gesture also, does that. So, the first thing I would like to start out with is, circles. Like that. In this video I was watching, he talked about how you don't actually have to have a perfect circle. And I know a lot of us tend to, tend to go crazy. Like, we think that we need to draw the best circle, but you don't. A lot of artists, believe it or not, they tend to draw very rough, like kind of like that. They don't even actually use perfect circles at all. So, the best way to... Sorry, I get nervous. Is I think that you should probably ghost it, and then lightly draw it, and then wait for it to get darker and darker. But not too dark, because then you'd have to erase, and that'd be a pain. And the reason why you draw light, but not too light, just enough that you can see it, is so that, you don't have to... You're gonna be drawing a lot of shapes and lines, and so that's why you need it to be light. Light enough you can see, though, because you don't want to be, zooming in and not even know what you're doing, because then that'd be a chaotic mess. The reason I started with the circle is because we tend to use circles the most. If you haven't noticed, most of the time when you see people draw, they're using circles and ovals. Now, circles, they're pretty round, but ovals are kind of different. I don't know if you can see the little circle thing from my tablet or not, because I don't know if it even shows it. But if you can actually see it, here's me ghosting it, and then here's me drawing it. Ovals aren't really, they're not, their ratio's, not the same, and it's based on direction. So that tends to make ovals more harder to draw than it is to draw circles. With the circle, you could, make your arm go round, so it's not as hard. If I've lost any of you, please let me know. I do tend to get nervous in voice calls, so... Okay. So right here, because I'm gonna delete this, I'm gonna show you different different angles of ovals that I think are very important. This one I tend to get wrong, even some artists do. Is this one, the vertical one. It's a lot harder to practice, but eventually some people get it. I still haven't gotten it. I've been drawing for, what, 10, 20 years? I don't know. Not 20, though, because I'm not that old. But this one, this right here, is easy for me, because, you know, right angles are pretty easy. Now, this one right here is a little tricky. It's, basically the opposite way. And then, of course, we have the vertical. I mean, there are other ways you can do that, but these are the most basic ones. Right, left, vertical, horizontal. So, I would recommend practicing this on, like, doing this on, like, maybe enough to fill a whole page. But first start ghosting it, and then slowly, surely make it visible. But not too dark. Just enough. Now if you're doing this on paper, I'm not sure if you guys know what the tripod grip is, but you can try doing that, which you put your thumb at the bottom and your index finger at the top. And then you turn your pencil around and then put the rest of it on there. And then use your arm or your elbow if you don't have the room, and just slowly, not too slow, but slowly get it. Make sure that you're thinking to make it light as possible, but enough to see. And then keep doing that. And it'll pretty much give you the same effect as what I did digitally. So next one is pretty simple. It's hold on. It's straight lines, which is the second most important after ellipses. Let's start with this one. Can't remember if this is vertical or horizontal though. But, you know, you just go back and forth, and it doesn't have to be straight, even though we are doing that. The whole point is to practice these lines so that your lines aren't stiff and you can draw lightly and add more shapes to it. Because then you can add the cool stuff and not have to erase it all, and it's less stressful that way. You do this multiple times all over your sheet, just like that. Back and forth, back and forth. And make sure that you're in a that you grip your pencil in a position that's comfortable for you, even digitally, because trust me, no one wants carpal tunnel. And you do the same with this, back and forth, over and over. can apply the same thing with triangles, which are not my favorite shape, but they're still important too. Alright, like that. Too dark with that one. And then there's the oblate shapes, or whatever they're called. Yeah, they're not oblate, but you know, like those things that kind of look like the stop sign, kind of like hexagons and stuff. Yeah, those shapes. You'll see it in a minute. Yeah, these are really important as well. Just as much as the other shape. And the last shape I want to introduce, this one's a little tricky. It's not hard, it's just tricky. So you draw a circle, and then you sway back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And voila, an egg shape. And you can do this. You can do this with the ellipses too, especially the ovals. You just make that circle and follow the line back and forth. Actually, they're pretty therapeutic if you enjoy doing them. But that's pretty much the drawing warm-ups I would recommend to start with. Next week we'll introduce stick figures. It's important to know how to draw different angles of the other shapes before continuing that, because we usually use 2 or 3 shapes in stick figures. Obviously we use the circle. Sometimes we use a triangle for the foot. And then we got the oval. These are the ones you mostly use in stick figures. So that's why these drawing warm-ups will be very handy, because when you're drawing all those stick figures, it probably wouldn't be a good idea if it was stiff. Now, I'm going to go on to the next one, which is about comics. Okay. This is a Marvel comic, which you guys are probably seen somewhere. I think this is one of the older ones. Yeah, 1958 is what it says. Now, comics have been around for many years. Many. Even in the 30s. They started in newspapers, actually, which we'll talk about once I find them. They're in here. Just didn't have time to put them in groups. Now, comics normally have a few things in common. Got the word bubbles, the panels, brackets, which aren't in this one right now. Oh wait, never mind, there's one right there. And then got your outside text, which usually is the title. Now, though we're not actually talking about this extra stuff, we're actually going to talk about various different types of comics. Now this one is a Western comic. As you can see, let's zoom in. You read, left from right. I had to think for a second because I'm so used to reading manga. If you feel me. I forgot what a Western reading was for a second. But yeah, you read this way. Left from right. And typically in a Western comic, you see a lot of wording. Like, a lot. And typically it's in color. Though you'll see crosshatch, like, right here. And slightly realistic facial features. As you can tell. And there's some bolding. A lot of Western comics use bolding. Yeah, they can see this channel. Sorry, I didn't see that till, like, just now. Now let's, go to this one. Man, this one's tiny. Alright, so are any of you familiar with webtoons?
Yes.
Alright, so you'll probably enjoy this one. As you can tell from the top of it, it says page 20 of 24, which was from a webcomic. Now, this isn't from webtoons, but I'm pretty sure you all know about the platform. It's got that horizontal thing where you just keep scrolling and there's more pages. Unlike other comics, most comics don't do that, if you've noticed. And they actually have to change the way that they do their pages. Because, you're reading it this way, like you're scrolling, like it was like it was made for a phone, you know? So you would often see pages like this. Like, they just keep going in this particular area. It's very rare for a webcomic to have, like, extra panels in this section. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's rare. But there is one thing that webcomics does have in common with the other comics. So, you know those one-page things they sometimes show with a big scene? They still have that. Now, because the way that they do the panels is slightly different, that means that they have to tell the story differently, too. Which, of course, means more close-ups, more... And then they'll have to do those far-away things. They do those a lot more. And sometimes in webcomics, you'll see this slight animation in certain scenes, like a visible animation going on. In one of the series I like, called The Red King, you would see Yvonne's skateboard literally as if it was animated, like he was flipping it the whole time. Now, that does happen in other comics, but it's a lot more common in webcomics. They have to use other tricks since they don't, you know.
So it's like a term of movement,
Yeah,
right?
it's an animation thing. I used to do... I was in an animation class, but I forgot the terminology already.
Happened.
Yeah. But yeah. And another thing that the webcomic and the Western comic have in common is they're normally colored, right? But most of the time you don't really see bold lines. Most of the time you see like cell shading. You know, it's quick, simple. But in this one,
Very detailed.
you don't really see cell shading that much. It's all paintery effect. Now I'm not saying that you can't do that though. It's just it takes a lot more time to do that. Unless for some reason you're just really fast at painting. I obviously am not. So that's why most people use cell shading. It's quick. And when people are out of time, they'll use textures that already exist, or screen tones. I'm pretty sure anyone who's ever read a manga knows what I'm talking about. But you actually can see that in here as well. It's like, it has a little screen tone in here. So even though he or she, I don't know their gender, let's just say they, even though they used a paintery effect, it looks like they didn't make their own textures. So if you're gonna do painting, I guess you gotta risk something. Now this one is your guys are probably familiar with it. It's Garfield. Now this one's from a newspaper. If you've ever read the newspaper, I don't know if you guys do, especially in this era. Newspapers are kind of short and sweet. They tell a short story. For example, like, let's say you were telling a story about Bob the cat. Or let's just use some dude called Bob, and he's a black cat. And you decided to tell this black cat and someone crossed the road, and or like the cat went under the thing and then someone crossed the street. You would have to make a little skit on that, and that's it. Most of the time, newspaper comics are very comedic. Garfield is a good example of that. Like this one. Happy birthday. Make a wish. And then, he just wants a big cake. Here's actually an old one. The quality sucks on this picture. And they would use bubbles for Garfield. Because at the moment, they didn't actually have him talk. You just could hear his thoughts. That's how they did it back then. Obviously, Garfield has changed over time. But if you can tell by the colors, they don't really cel shade it at all. They don't use bold lines. They don't use cross hatching. They just simply ink it and color it with basic colors. I mean, it's a newspaper, so you gotta do short and quick. But usually in the newspapers, you would have to pick something short and sweet and something people would probably remember. Because in the newspaper, the importance is to catch your eye. So that's what I believe. That's what I believe, because you see it a lot in newspapers, and they always have this short comic, But personally, I think it's worked, and it's still popular to this day. No, I don't know why I said web comics. It's worked. Newspaper comics are still popular to this day. another example of a Western comic. This one's more modern based. This one's like newer. See, here is they're using way too many words. You know, to this day, I still don't know why they do it. And you can tell that it's still cell shading. It's just blended, which you can easily do if you know what you're doing, that is. And while we're on the topic of this, so let's say you're in a company and you work on a comic, and let's say you got people. Now, usually in graphic novels, Western comics, and all that, you would typically have a colorist, someone who does the inks, a pencilist, the author itself, and other people. So you would have a lot of people working on one particular comic. And that's probably why they're able to, like, do this amazing graphics, you know? Because they got a lot of people that don't have to worry about the deadline. And then they're like, you know, they sell it after that. Now, if you have read manga, they don't really have a lot of people normally. They got a lot of editors, though. Especially in very popular manga. Like, I guess JoJo Bizarre Adventure, I guess would be an example. Pretty sure that person has a lot of editors. But typically, the manga artist does the inking and the penciling. But, you know, mangas aren't normally colored. And it's not that they can't afford a colored printer or anything. It's just how they do it. Actually, Western comics used to be in black and white as well.
I would say it's more of a preference.
Yeah, I mean, they're also kind of, you know, old-fashioned. That's just Japan for you. But at the same time, a lot of people like it. So it works. Let's see. And speaking of which, here's an example. And I'm pretty sure you guys know what this is. My Hero Academia, or also known as Boku no Hero Academia. So if you look at this, this manga is particularly known for doing speed lines, which is also why doing those lines are important. But you can also get a ruler and just start doing those lines too. Though, traditional ink is a little tricky to do with rulers, so you gotta be careful. Though you can always just buy those wood type rulers and get away with it. And then you would have maybe at least one big scene right here. And here's the crosshatch, and then the speed lines again. And if you really look at it, here's the screen tones. From the distance, you can't see it, but from here you can. And this is actually a really popular screen tone. I even use it. It sort of just gives an effect. Like, you know, it makes it feel more alive. And I think that's why people use it. Plus, it's a way to get away with not using textures, because imagine drawing all those lines or well, dots. That would take forever. And also the other thing that I like is when you combine cross-hatching with screen tones, they give a really cool shading effect. And that's why I think that's important. A lot of manga artists tend to use that combination, and it always works. And a good example is Durarara. I'm not even sure if I'm saying it right. I'm just gonna call it Dur. Anyways, that particular manga tends to use that combination, and it works really well. And actually, that's one of the mangas that I've noticed that has a lot of team working with each other. It's pretty rare, but it can happen. Another one that does that is Another. If you're into, like, gore and stuff, that's definitely a manga I would recommend. Though be wary if you're 14 and up, especially 14. Just mentally prepare yourself for that. Another series that I particularly think is good, especially if you're into that, is Uzumaki, done by Junji Ito. If you're really into horror and you're into manga, you've probably heard his name. Probably. Let's move on. I kind of got off topic a little. Alright. So, this is the next one. I don't know if any of you know what Dark Horse is. It's an indie company. It's also Western based, but they're a little different. In a sense on how they do things. To me, I would think that theirs is more like a graphic novel if I was to really pinpoint. Because their series are pretty short. They're not ongoing, kind of like, X-Men or Spider-Man. And I also noticed that they do stick to cell shading for the most part, the company. But the thing is, they don't always, because it's an indie company. They don't really have a particular set of rules that they have to abide. You don't even have to, like, have a bunch of people or be in teams, so it's not like that. Though they do have a good amount of comics. I think Dark Horse also did some Star Wars comics and some Indiana Jones and Tomb Raider, I think. They also got a few hero comics of their own. So, I do recommend checking that particular company out if you're into that stuff. Now, if you look at the style, it's similar to Western stuff. Actually, I'm going to go back to the manga because I did forget to talk about the style. Now, it's somewhat realistic, but it also feels like it's slightly inspired by manga. Because the way that they're doing their eyes kind of reminds me of manga a little, but also Western stuff at the same time. So they have, like, I guess really it's more like semi-realism at that point. Because you can tell they kind of still, they don't look too cartoony. They still sort of, look realistic. And actually, for some reason, this outfit and the way that this person's dressed kind of reminds me of Stranger Things. like the first episode of Stranger Things. I don't know why, it just reminds me of that. Now, you can also tell they're doing speed lines and cross-hatching. But they're not doing any bold stuff, like no bold lines, kind of like Western comics do. It's usually, when a comic does that, I tend to think it's like a mixed thing. They take one thing they like from this particular type of comic, and then they take another thing that they like from that comic, and just combine it. I think that's a cool thing. Now, we go back here. So, look at the style for a second. I mean, it's not your stereotypical manga style, but you definitely can tell. Now, as we know, manga typically are known for this in style. Though we call it anime, but stick with me. So typically you would see big eyes, small nose, small mouth, and a pointy chin. Sometimes round. Especially in this particular comic. And typically you would see not really tall bodies, more like shorter. And you would always see crazy hairstyle. I mean, there's no other way to explain it except crazy hair. Especially in Dragon Ball. Their hair is definitely crazy. It felt like you just took a mop and then just decided to style it everywhere with spikes. That's how I feel about it. And typically in manga, we usually see girls with very basic hairstyle, but stylized at the same time. If we look at her for a second, her hair is like right here. It seems pretty basic, but then we look at this area, this like at the back. It sort of makes her hair look more unique, even though it's not. So, usually, the girls would have simplified hair, and the boys would have crazy hair, and anyone with the most craziest hair, you would typically know that is the main character. Now, when it comes to Western comics, that's not so well known. So, we normally judge them based on how they act to tell who is the main character when it comes to Western comics. And also, another thing that I always notice in this particular style is their clothes are very simplified. But the stuff that they add to the character is what makes them unique. Okay, so we got this right here. This little mask. I mean, by itself, that's not really anything important. But if we take in consideration into this outfit right here, it tends to make it look unique. By itself, it wouldn't be, though. I guess that's the power of manga. Pun no intended. Alright. So here's another manga example. You've probably seen this before. People who are really into the horror. This is called Tokyo Ghoul. Now the style, you can tell it's still anime-y kind of looks. Big eyes, small nose, the whole thing. But if you look at the chin, it's more realistic based more than the other styles. And then you got your simplified hair. Now, this series is very different when it comes to hair. It's not crazy. They keep their hair very simplified till later. And then the girls would have the one with the crazy hair. But typically, mangas tend to have one thing in common. Big eyes, small nose. I always noticed that. Now there are some incidents where manga is completely realistic. The Junji Ito style is similar to that. But even if the style is different, manga always has, they always have this particular similarity. Like the way that they crosshatch, or the way that they react, or the way that the panels are done. So you would instantly know that it's a manga.
I kind of know a manga that draws like very realistically, like in a way. The name of it is called Sunken Rock.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Very nice.
Yeah. Though, even with all this, all the differences, every comic has something in common. And we'll get to that soon. Here's another newspaper. So this is, I think, no, this isn't Archie. This is Blondie. Now, you normally would see this on certain bubble gum. And you open it up, and there is there's a story. Which, this is kind of different. Normally, you would see this kind of stuff on newspaper. But if you buy the gum, a particular gum, there's this, it would appear in here. And it follows the same thing that the newspaper does. It's a short story, and it's enough to make you remember what it is. Here's another example. My God, them and their enormous wording. That was the only thing I've always hated about Western comics, is they tried to squeeze too much wording. I hope I'm not the only one that has a problem with that.
You're the only one.
Like, I see a lot of Western comics always putting a paragraph of words in a bubble.
Gets them nowhere, honestly.
Yeah, they've always kept to it, and somehow it sells, so they must be doing something right. But here we are again, looking at the style. And this one's more updated. And somewhere in here you can actually see a few manga influences. So I think that Western comics have taken a liking recently. But they again have, their basics, the bold lines, cross-hatching, fancy shading. And here we are. This one's also from a newspaper. It's not as short as the other ones, though, as you can tell. But it's still short. Like, it's still like a short story. It's a little longer than the other ones. I think they made a movie on this, actually. Which, this, again, they would normally do, they normally wouldn't do much shading. But you would see a little bit, and, like, if they needed it, like in this dress, it can tell you that it's made of leather, basically. Kinda looks like this was made in the 60s. Holy crap, it is! I guess the right era. I'm really good at this. Alright. Now this one is... It's not a webcomic. It's not a newspaper. What do you think what it is?
I would say graphic novel.
Yep. Bingo. Now graphic novels are... how do I explain it? They're
I
not...
mix between both.
They're not the same as, how Western comics are. They're normally series-based and typically a short series. They would have a few volumes, enough to explain the story. Normally it's not ongoing, nor is it supposed to. And typically they spend many hours on this and then just release it. Which is completely different from most comics. Most comics, they have a due date, you know? But usually graphic novels don't. It's kind of the same with light novels. Now, light novels, you know, mostly is writing. But this one, the whole idea is to tell a story kind of like maybe it's a movie or a short series or something. But that's about it. I haven't really done much research on graphic novels, so don't hold up to my word just yet. I'll make sure to do some research before I talk about it again. Now, this one is also from Dark Horse. And it is definitely a comic. And here you go, with the bold lines. This one looks like it was definitely inspired by your typical Western comics. That we know today, anyways. Now, as you can tell, they do cel shading, but it's soft. It's not hard and crisp. It's soft. So they blend it. Or use the blur tool. You never know. Now this one is also a graphic novel. The reason I chose this particular shot is to show you that perspective is kind of important in this, and it can change the mood. Like different angles and shots can change the mood, not just the colors. Colors are important though, which will be discussed later. And we got this. It's also a graphic novel. And by the looks of it, based on Adam and Eve. Now, you can tell basic cel shading, nothing out of the ordinary. They did blend it though. And I think this particular one is similar to Western comics. Especially the writing. It's a lot. And I think that makes the difference between the manga versus Western. The manga usually keeps stuff short, especially when they're talking. Even when they're giving a lot of information, they still somewhat like split the bubbles up. They don't like overloading the bubbles. I think that's why a lot of people like manga, actually. I mean, well, that's one of the reasons. Here's another example of a manga. Now, this is pretty rare, This doesn't happen a lot, but usually you'd be surprised with at least one colored page from a manga artist. If you've ever heard of this, is Koroko no Basket or Basket or Basket, yeah, Basket. And you can tell the way that they shade is completely different. They do cell shading. The thing is they use traditional stuff. Most of the comics I've shown so far have mostly been digital based with the color. But something I've always noticed about comic artists is they tend to use traditional media. And if you can tell by the looks of it, marker. A particular type called Copics. Now if I'm mispronouncing this, I apologize. So based on what I said, the differences are very slight, but they always have things in common. Panels, bubbles, brackets, mostly the same size, except for like certain, things. But in a nutshell, you can pretty much tell that there is similarity. They all tend to use cross-hatching. Some of them use bold, some don't, though. The inking is similar for the most part. There's still the bubbles and brackets, like I said. And, like I said, there's similar stuff. But there is one thing that I always like to go by, and that's this. Comics are, to me, a stop motion. And they're a type of storytelling, just like animation or video games. Even photography tells stories. But the thing that I always notice about comics versus all the other types of storytelling that I see, not just the stop motion thing, is that they force you to look at a panel for the amount of time that they want you to look at it, which is why it looks like it's moving when it's not. And that's why I think it's called a stop motion. And that's what I really like about comics. Now, does anyone have any questions?
Nope, none.
Alright. Because I did say a lot, so this is recorded, so if you guys don't remember anything I said, it'll be there. Including the drawing warm-ups. Now, since this is near the end, I will tell you guys what exactly you need to work on. For now, I would like you to do 5 or even 10 sheets of drawing warm-ups. From circles, ovals, eggs, thingy, to lines, and triangles, and all that. And try to practice them daily, as much as possible, but show at least 1 or 2 sheets of what you've done, and submit it. That's the homework for that part.
Yeah, I have a question now.
Huh?
Question where are we submitting this?
I have no idea. I'm gonna ask what's up when they're not busy. Ask. That's
Okay.
one thing I did forget to ask them. As far as the comic stuff, just write down stuff about the different styles and what is all the same about comics. And that's pretty much it for that. So we're pretty much done because it's already 8:30.
Hey, it's already 8:30? That's
Yeah,
bad.
yeah, that actually went by quicker than I thought. Yeah. Anyway, sorry about my nervousness. I get that way sometimes.
No, no problem. Take your time.
Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the awkward string.
Thank you so much.
No problem. I guess I'll see you guys tomorrow, because tomorrow's Saturday.
Wait, tomorrow? I
Yeah,
thought it was like every Friday.
there's gonna
Did I,
be
did I,
different type of topics.
hold on, did I miss something?
I'm available every Monday, Friday, and Saturday.
Oh, okay, okay.
This one's gonna be at 2:30 p.m. EST though.
All right.
Yeah, I don't have anything to
Is
do tomorrow, so.
is it gonna be the same thing or is it something else?
Probably different topic.
Okay.
Well, this time I'm not really gonna be talking about comics. Oh, because like I did overload you guys with a lot, and this one is actually gonna be about stick figures.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually gonna be pretty easy, but yeah, you know what I mean. You'll know
Got it.
tomorrow. I'll discuss it then.
Cool, cool, cool.
And
All right, guys. Have a
Joey,
nice day.
you can watch the recording. Everything will be explained there.
See you tomorrow.
All right. See ya.
Bye.